Open Line, everyone. Such an important topic tonight, talking about domestic violence, something that impacts so many people. We have with us as our guest Sharon Roberson. She is the president and CEO of the YWCA of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. They're the largest provider of domestic violence services in the entire state, and we're a state that is in need of those kind of services. As we went to break, I talked about, let's say you suspect a friend, family, loved one, whatever, is involved in a relationship like this. You yourself are not, but you suspect it. What do you recommend? And what about this notion of victim blaming type questions that could be more harmful than helpful?
Okay, well, let's sort of deconstruct the issue. First of all, if you are truly wanting to help the person, the first thing is to educate yourself about domestic violence. It's very easy to say, why doesn't she leave? But there are a number of reasons why women don't leave, not the least of which is dangerous. They are hopeful the relationship can reconcile. They think that maybe therapy will help, maybe he doesn't drink. There are all these excuses for not leaving. And that's not always the solution for an individual. It's very difficult to leave. It's easy for a family member to get frustrated, and we understand that. It typically takes a woman 7 times before she leaves a domestic violence relationship, 7 times. And so by going back and forth with family members, and often going to be with a family member where the individual who's the abuser knows where you are and may find them, that is bringing trouble to their doorstep. So a lot of times relatives and friends don't want to get involved. But I will say this, is that in talking with survivors over the years, their relatives and family members were their lifesavers. I was on a call the other day on a panel with a woman that was a survivor, and she tells her story. And her family really had forsaken her, for lack of a better way of putting it, but they were tired of the situation. They said she must like it. They actually did blame her. They said, you must like it if you stay. But she had one cousin that would not give up on her. And once she had her safety plan, she had her go bag, she had her things together, her documents, and she was ready to leave. Her one cousin stuck with her and really saved her life, because this man had choked this woman and she had passed out. And when she woke up, she knew she had to leave. If it had not been for that cousin, she would have probably lost her life.
Good grief. And it's very interesting what you said. You said it typically takes, I believe you said 7 instances before someone leaves.
Yes.
What would you say to somebody who's, involved in the second or the third? Why is it 7 times, and how alarming is it, the fact that it's 7 times?
It is very scary, and the reason why is that each time there's a lot of hope. And we see people who leave the Weaver Center and return. Everyone has hope things are going to change, but it's very difficult for things to change. And what you do not want is to overlook some very, very dangerous signs. We have what is called the lethality assessment program here in Nashville. And the YW and the Family Safety Center have joined with the Nashville Metro Police Department and trained the officers on how, on a domestic violence call, to determine whether in the future this call can become lethal. And they ask questions of the victim. Has he ever choked you? Has he threatened suicide? Does he have access to weapons? Has he pulled a gun on you? Has he told you he's going to kill you? Those are just some of the questions that you will be asked if you are a victim. If you agree, you can talk to a crisis counselor on the spot. And what that does is give you those options, because what you don't want to do is believe in a person that ends up killing you.
Wow. What is the law right now? I've heard, I think I've seen on TV where there's a domestic violence situation and, it's terrible, and then police come and the woman's like, I'm not going to press charges. And in some cases, I think they press charges anyway, but how important is it that the woman press charges? And what if the woman says after a day or an hour, I don't want to press charges? What happens in that situation?
It actually is a district attorney's office that actually brings the charges. The problem with the woman not cooperating is that you lose a part of that proof. And their failure to show at the hearings, the trial could go forward. However, without that proof of the victim saying what happened, it becomes difficult for the prosecution. And I was on a radio show with a judge, and she said that's one of her most difficult things is that that someone gets arrested for abusing someone, the court date is set, and the person does not show up. I will say here in Nashville, we have what is called the Gene Crow Advocacy Center and the Family Safety Center. And those two organizations will help you through the court process if that's the route for you. They will have it so that an advocate will go to court with you, because sometimes it's just a matter of fear. Some people do not go forward with this, not because they don't want the person punished. They just have a great fear that if they get out, they'll kill them because they have gotten them in trouble. And so they really help you through this whole process. So it makes it a lot easier for you to show up to court so you can give the person, so the person can be punished for what they've done for you. And also to keep.
I admire the work you do and what you see all the time and how difficult it must be. And so what do you think right now the state of the laws are here in Tennessee? Are they adequate or not? Or what would you say? Where are we right now with the laws in Tennessee?
I think to the extent that we enforce the laws, we have some good laws. Now we have some ways we could go, but there are some good laws. One of the biggest gaps we have is abusers still having access to weapons. If you are convicted, you're supposed to dispose of your weapons or give them to someone else, and they could be given to anyone. However, there are not clear checks and balances. And so therefore, what you could end up is someone who is an abuser really having easy access to their weapons. And most people who are killed in domestic violence circumstances is with a gun.
Is with a gun. So gun laws are an area where you feel like there could be more strength. What about stalking laws and restraining orders and those kinds of things?
Well, all of those things are helpful. Orders of protections, which is a little different. A restraining order of protection are two different things, but the orders of protections are good to build a record that this person is not supposed to be near you. But there are some mechanisms that help you in that regard. They tend to be expensive, where you are notified if the person is so close to you. Stalking is very, very dangerous and very, very hard to police as a society, because if a person is of the mindset that they don't care if they get in trouble or they don't care if they die, it is very difficult to keep them from stalking another person.
So how hard is this work for you to do?
It's difficult when you have the days when you know someone is going back into a situation that could potentially take their lives or they could lose their lives. But it's wonderful when you see people get on that path. There are many that do it, and that's why I want this to be a message of hope for anyone that's listening to this. There are many women that take back their power, take back the control of their lives, and live wonderful lives going forward. And it's so much better for their families, so much better for their children, so much better for them economically. And so for those cases of those survivors that thrive, it is well worth it. All the work is worth it.
How likely is it that someone who has done this can reform an abuser? And the cycle is generally, you know, they do this and then they apologize and they say, I'll do better. How likely is it that they do reform? Is there a program they go to, or what could happen to the abuser that would turn things around?
There are actually programs, they're called batterers intervention programs, and sometimes they're court-ordered in certain places, sometimes they're voluntary, but there are programs to help individuals, especially those who have been convicted of domestic violence. I will say that the jury is out, so to speak, on how effective these types of programs are. A lot of times people say that they want to get help in order to, that's part of the cycle. I'm going to get help. I'm going to do better. I'm going to quit drinking. And so it's not that I don't want anyone to put any merit into those cases. It's just that they are not necessarily the remedy for someone that is really an abusive person.
What impact has the pandemic had on this? Have you seen more? I feel like I've read that, but what impact has the pandemic had?
When COVID first hit and when Nashville was on the stay-at-home order, our crisis line calls and texts went up 80%. I mean, it was really unbelievable. And part of that we understood because individuals no longer had any escape. Everyone was at home together. The children were not going to school, and that added pressure. Many were not going into their jobs, and that was really a refuge because if someone is going to work during the day, they get away from their abuser, or the abuser is going to work every day, or both. Church families were distant. Families had an excuse. Actually, it seems as though it was an abuser's dream because you could have this individual all to yourself, and there were valid reasons why they couldn't go anyplace else. What we learned from some of our other providers around the country, especially on the West Coast in Washington State, where they had COVID earlier than we did, that just wait, you're going to get these cases. And the cases that came into shelter were much more extreme. There were people who had really had a very difficult time, significant physical injuries, and that's what we saw. And that was really heartbreaking because people waited until they couldn't take it anymore before they came into shelter.
And where are we now?
Right now, we're staying pretty full. What we have done, though, is we have allowed people to stay in shelter longer. We are a crisis shelter, and I would love if we could have people there for, 6 months to a year. But we have 60 days, and we work very hard to get you into some sort of housing program. Have your children, they go to school. We work for you to get job training, career skills, educational services. We link you up with all of these services that you'll need in order to give you that fresh start. Let's say you're here and it takes you that long to, let's say, maybe find some relative in another city where you can leave. It gives you that respite and that time to work on where you need to do to really move out of your situation.
Interesting. So 60 days. And do most people take the entire 60 days, or how does that work?
Pretty much now, yes. Some people, it depends. There's a single side and there's a family side. There are two different sides, or wings, so to speak, of the Weaver Center. It's much like a dormitory. And on the family side, that tends to take longer. And sometimes they have to stay even longer than that. And that's because the complications of getting settled with children are much more, it's just more complex than for a single one.
And, I mean, that points out right there when people ask why don't they leave. I mean, they are blowing up their lives. They are leaving, and they're having to reestablish an entire new life, new job potentially, right? New city, new everything. And that's really hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. You have to understand that this person is often part of your life because they may be the person that helps with the kids. The kids are still their kids. Judges will let the fathers, even if they're abusive toward you, see their children have visitation. Very complex, because just because you abuse your spouse doesn't mean you are abusive in the sense of the law. Because many judges, in my viewpoint, if you abuse the mother in front of the children, that's abusive to the children, and you shouldn't see those children. But that's many judges disagree with me.
Very interesting. All right, we're going to take a break. Continue the discussion. If you want to call in, it's a tough topic, I know, but there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. When we come back, I want to ask about some specific cases that you can share with us. So we'll take a break. Be back right after this.